IUIC doesn't know what biblical justice is. Here, what's going on, party people in the place to be? I go by the name of the BK Apologetics, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Thank you so much for hanging in there with us as we continue on our Bodega Virtual Blitz on our UIC, where we've covered a plethora of topics, and now we will now engage with IUIC when it comes to biblical justice. Now, disclaimer. And it's sad that I keep having to do this when we talk about justice. We are not proponents of CRT. All right, let me just put it out there. None of us are. Nobody in the UA is proponents of CRT. We're not liberals in that sense. We are not progressive Christians. All right, I just want to be on record. We are not proponents of CRT. So when we talk of justice, we're talking about what the Bible says justice is.
That's right.
Let me say it how Chris Tucker said it to his partner, Officer Lee. Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Basically,
because you already know.
That's right.
Like, so basically, what you're saying is you're a Marxist.
Right. That's what. After all of that, that's what they're gonna get. After one thing, they're gonna get. And right. And introductions, of course, are in order. We have, of course, the David Ruffin of Urban Apologetics. MJ Jackson's in the building. What's going on, MJ?
Captain America himself.
Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis.
Man, it's great, man. I love MJ, man. And of course, we have doing double duty this day, coming in again. Apologist in Detroit. What's going on,
I'm the Black Captain America, the old one. That's me. What's his name? What's his name? I can't remember his name.
No, I don't remember his name either.
Okay, goodness, I gotta remember that.
Yeah, so anyway, so enough of the pleasantries. We're gonna get into it. There's a couple things I want to clear up in this video, and then I'm gonna let these two gentlemen do what they do best. So with that being said, let me share my screen. All right, so here we go.
You right now because you don't know who you are.
That's right.
Many of you think you're just black. Ain't that a color in a crayon box?
Yeah.
African American named after Leo Scipio Africanus, who conquered Hannibal in the Second Punic War. He put his name on that continent. A white Roman general, Amerigo Vespucci. Now, many of y'all think Columbus discovered America. No. That's what we taught in history. Amerigo Vespucci discovered America. He put his name on the continent. A white Italian navigator. So,
okay. All right. So let's get to chopping this fable.
Before you do that, I have one comment.
Yes, sir.
You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Big up to Phil Fox. He's on next. So, let's see here. Okay, stop sharing. Okay. Alrighty. And yes, as always, when we play this video, fair use. We're using this video to critique IUIC. So he says that Scipio Africanus, who conquered Hannibal in the Second Punic War, he put his name on that continent. That white Roman general, right? And then America. No. That's what we was taught in history. Amerigo Vespucci discovered America. He put his name on that continent, right? Well, in Ancient African Christianity by David E. Wilhite, he says, in Africa, Scipio and Hannibal met in the Battle of Zama, a titanic clash of elephants, cavalry, and infantry. Other African groups, such as the Numidians, defected and pledged their support to Rome, and so Scipio's army soundly defeated Hannibal's. For his ultimate defeat of Carthage and its influence on the surrounding region, the Roman general was awarded the title Africanus, or the feeder of the Africans. He didn't give his name to Africa. He defeated these Africans, and they gave him the name Africa. It's the other way around. It's the other way around. Okay? Also, and you can find this in Britannica, Amerigo Vespucci, merchant and explorer navigator who took part in early voyages to the New World and occupied the influential post of Polito Maya, master navigator in Sevilla. The name for the Americas is derived from his given name, right? Well, that's true, right? But how does his name get attached to the continent? Well, the voyage of 1501 to 02 is fundamental importance in the history of geographic discovery of that Vespucci himself and scholars as well become convinced that the newly discovered lands were not part of Asia, but a, quote, new world. In 1507, a humanist, Martin Vassimula, reprinted at Saint Dia in Lorraine the Quatuor Americi Navigationes, 4 Voyages of America, preceded by a pamphlet of his own entitled Cosmography Introductio, and he suggested that the newly discovered world be named Ab Americo Inventore Quasi Americi Terram Seve Americam. Sheesh. From Americo, the discoverer, as if it were the land of Americas or America. So the guy didn't put his name. This other individual said, hey, we should call it this, right? The proposal is perpetuated in a large planisphere of waltzing mullers in which the name America appears for the first time. Although applied only to South America, the suggestion caught on. The extension of the name to North America, however, came later. On the upper part of the map, with the hemisphere comprising the Old World, appears the picture of Ptolemy. On the part of the map with the New World hemisphere is the picture of Vespucci. So neither one of these individuals put their name on any of these places. Why is that important? Am I nitpicking? Am I being petty? No. The reason why I'm not being nitpicky or petty is because this man is in the public square as a teacher. He's out there teaching people supposedly correct things. And off rip, he's already off on history. Okay? He's a teacher. The Bible says that teachers will be judged more harshly. He's out there with a microphone, right? With his friend saying, that's right. No, that's wrong. That's very wrong. And this man he's a teacher. You cannot be a teacher and get history this jacked up. Okay? So with that, if you guys want to say anything, MJ? No?
Oh, sorry. You'll see, and as you have been saying, these guys are terrible with history. Their whole hermeneutic is predicated on bad history as well. And this is really just, it's a shame to see black folk engaging in this type of, it's just a shame. I don't want to say anything crazy.
Oh, okay, very good. All right, so with that now, let me start. Let me start this video from the tippy top. You guys tell me when to stop, okay?
Just play it to about the 20-second mark. It doesn't take very long for them to put their foot in their mouths.
The justice that you need is not marching in the streets. It's not hands up, don't shoot in the streets. That's right. It's none of those things. The justice that many of our people are seeking is this Bible right here. This is your history book. And that's what we're reading today. Let me get verse 68. I'm going to show you slave ships in the Bible.
Oh, you can stop it there. Because like then he goes he immediately jumps from his
he's going to show history, but he's already shown that he don't know history. But
right, his definition of justice and some history to, their typical, botchering of Deuteronomy 28. Here, let me share my screen, and I'm gonna throw a slide up there for Matthew, and then I will be in the backdrop. I'll be in the background, and Matthew, you take it from there. Okay.
I just want to say that when I come to Detroit or Brooklyn and one of you brothers are getting it on the street, I'm just going to stand there like this with my hands like a yellow brother screaming, that's right.
That's great. I would love that.
These dudes are
I
some
would love
paper
that backup.
tigers. These are some paper tigers, man.
I would love that. Please do that for me. Yes.
Yes, sir. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start if that's cool with you, Chris. You good?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right. So the brother said that the justice that you need is not marching in the streets. It's not hands up, don't shoot. In the streets, the justice that many of our people are seeking is in the Bible right here. Now, I would agree that we do need to find out God's perspective on justice. Excuse me if I sound a little stuffy. I'm here in Hot Springs and something's jacking me up a little bit, but it's all good. It's not going to stop this truth. So, what does the Bible say about justice? What is God's perspective on justice? Next slide. All right. So, when you're engaging in reading the Bible, you need to take a look at the definitions of the words that are used for justice, because what we don't want to do is import our very Western, modern understanding of justice onto the text, but we want to draw out that which God has inspired. That's what we don't want to do. So the biblical definition of justice in the Old Testament is mishpat, right? It's the Hebrew word for justice. It occurs in multiple forms over 400 times in the Old Testament. Its most basic meaning means to treat people equitably, and it has two sides, both a positive side and a negative side, which involves trying cases in a just manner. It means punishing wrongdoers or acquitting the innocent based on the merits of the case, regardless of one's social status. Okay. And when you study politics over here in the West, you would understand that this would involve what's called negative rights and positive rights. So over here in the West, we do a really good job of recognizing negative rights, but we fail to recognize that more robust side, which is positive. Okay. So on the other side of the coin of the word mishpat, it has to do with more than just dishing out punishment. See, these Hebrew Israelites claim that Jesus is going to come back and dish out punishment, and they're going to be right there with him. That's what they want to do. But it's a little bit more to it. It's a little bit more to justice than dishing out punishment and legal rulings. It also has to do with giving people their due. We're giving people their rights. Now, some of the rights were necessitated in the Bible based on one's circumstances, okay, and station in life. Deuteronomy 18 is a perfect example, right? It directs that the priest of the tabernacle should be supported by a certain percentage of the people's income. That support is described as the priest mishpat. So guess what? Mishpat therefore means to give people what they are due. And in this sense, we're not talking about a legal ruling or anything like that. What we're talking about is that which God has marked off for them to give people their due. And that has to do with care, protection, or punishment. Next slide. All right, so oftentimes you'll see justice and righteousness together when you read the Bible, right? And this is what gives it its robust nature. The robust biblical view of justice is primarily captured in what's called a hendiatus of Mishpat and Zedekiah, right? One of my favorite scholars, and I think this is also one of Chris' favorite scholars, Christopher Wright, he notes this: found together as a couplet, either righteousness and justice or justice and righteousness, they form what is technically called a hendiatus, a single complex idea expressed through the use of two words. Once again, why is it expressed through two words? Because the Bible wasn't written in English, and we don't have necessarily the tools in this language to express what it's trying to say. But you can also translate that as social justice. You can translate that as social justice. We got any more slides on that, Chris? Or
No, and just to be clear, with this whole translation of social justice, that first of all, social justice is historically speaking is a Christian theological term that was coined by a Jesuit philosopher theologian, as he was kind of expressing.
You said Jesuit, man. Oh man, now that's
it.
It. Confirmation.
It doesn't matter.
Confirmation.
Right. It doesn't matter. But the point being, because it was I think it was in Central America or South America, somewhere down there. But the point being, a Christian coined the term social justice, and this is for the other people who hear the term social justice and their minds explode. And so, like, scholar Christopher J. Wright is just citing history, actual history, in this case, and then I like to use the term human flourishing, because I think that it's less familiar to people and it communicates a very similar concept without the baggage of what people commonly think of as social justice today. So human flourishing, when you think of that conjunction, this compound word, or this conjunction word, when you think of human flourishing, it's pretty, self-defining. It's all humans flourishing, and that's kind of the intent of justice in the Bible. That's why it has this negative aspect and this positive aspect, is because God wants to make sure, he wants to assure that human beings are flourishing, and they're not oppressed, and they're not taken advantage of. So what you'll see with this, as after Matthew just explained this, is that when you actually look into the scriptures, the Bible gives us a very the Bible starts to use this justice, righteousness, adiatis. It appears over 80 times together, so it's a lot in scripture, and it starts to use this conjunction, this justice, righteousness, adiatis, in order to express things about God. Here's an example of that. So this is the promise to Abraham that God made. This is the second time Yahweh is speaking to Abraham, and it reads, this is Genesis 18:18-19. Abraham is to become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will command his children and his house after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. This is how the Lord will fulfill to Abraham what he has promised. So God makes this promise to Abraham that he's going to bless all the nations of the world. The way he's going to do that is by him teaching Abraham, and subsequently Abraham teaching his descendants after him to follow the way of the Lord. And what is the way of the Lord? It is justice. That's the simplest version of it. Righteous and justice is justice. Here's some more examples of how justice and righteousness is presented in scripture, particularly the Old Testament, is what we're talking about right now, and to highlight that. So let's go to the next slide. Israel saw justice as central to God's very identity. You look at songs like Psalm 89:14. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Love and faithfulness go before you. So they sing, they recognize and worship and sing to God. Righteousness and justice are the foundation. It is this fundamental thing that your throne as ruler, sovereign ruler of all of creation represent. Look at this other Psalm, Psalm 140:12. I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy. Now, not only was righteousness and justice the way of the Lord, Genesis 18:19, not only is God's very throne known as the foundation of his throne is justice and righteousness, but this justice and righteousness has a specific orientation that is often revealed, that being to care for poor people. So justice, remember, positive and negative, it's oriented toward preventing poor people from being exploited. When we go to the laws, you just saw SOC his teaching right before this one. He gets into it a little bit when he's talking about the law, but there's practical reasons behind the law. And when you actually look into the law, what you'll see is there's a lot of the vast majority of these laws are like anti-exploitative. Earlier, CMB is talking about the Sabbath. What's the Sabbath about? It's about getting some rest. It's about not overworking. You go to Exodus 23, and it's like, hey, don't overwork your servants, your slaves, your servants, employees. Don't overwork your animals, and don't overwork yourself. That's actually what Moses says when he's talking about the Sabbath. There's this practical, flourishing principle behind the Sabbath. It's not simply so that you can not do something, and it's not simply so that there's a day set aside to worship God, because you're supposed to worship God every single day. It's so that you don't exploit and oppress. And God, Yahweh, in the case of the Sabbath, Yahweh modeled it. The narrative of creation gives you 6 days of him creating. Then what did he do on the seventh day? He rested. He modeled this flourishing principle himself. And that's consistent with how the Israelites, how the Jews saw him. This foundation of his throne is justice and righteousness. His justice and righteousness cares about everybody. He doesn't just care about the rich. Earlier, when we were talking about grace in that video, when Romulus set up Rome, he made some plebeians and he made some clients, right? So he only really cared about the plebeians because he made them rich, and the clients were kind of at the mercy of them. But yeah, Yahweh cares about everybody. Yahweh puts laws in place that says, that repeatedly says, don't oppress this person, don't exploit this person, don't cheat this person, don't lie in court. All things that we know and understand are related to justice. It's no wonder that the Israelites saw Yahweh's throne as representation of justice, something very central to his character. So when poor Mr. Israelite guy talks about marching in the streets and says that this is not the type of justice that that the Bible is espousing, he's sadly mistaken, because that's exactly an example. Now, it's not maybe the way that the people march in the street doesn't fully represent the way Yahweh would represent justice, but it's certainly rooted in this notion of the type of justice that Yahweh wants, which is a legitimate, real justice down here on earth. Matthew, you want to jump in and share anything? If not, I'm going to pop on to this next slide.
Before you do that, I want to add another disclaimer. We are also not proponents of Black Lives Matter, the organization.
Nope.
But we definitely are proponents of Black Lives Matter as an ideal, because Black people are also images of God. Just want to put that out there just in case. All right,
do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Gotta do it.
Let's get back to the slides. Okay, so here's an important thing to know. There are over 2,000. Go ahead, Matthew. Jump in.
Protest is a biblical. It is biblical. Protest is biblical. We see this from Jesus, where in Luke 18:3. You had a certain widow, right? Oh, there's that one of those classes of people that have those positive rights, right? This widow is coming to in town and keeps coming to the judge, and in the New International Version says, "Grant me justice against my adversary." I know they read King Jimmy, so let me read King Jimmy, King James, and there was a widow in that city. She came up saying, "Avenge me of mine adversary," right? And she kept coming. And eventually she vexed that judge. But Jesus goes on to say that how much more will it be for the one true God to avenge or give justice to his righteous ones when they have been wrong? So there's nothing wrong with protesting. There's nothing wrong with taking it to the Lord. You can do both. But you have to do it decently in order. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Go ahead, Chris.
So there are over 2,000 direct references to justice in the Bible. That includes both Old Testament and New Testament, because Matthew's slide earlier was referring to specifically the Old Testament. Think about that. If the Old Testament has roughly 400, how many does that mean are there in the New Testament? That means the New Testament talks about justice 3 times as much as the Old Testament talks about justice. But here, this is another Old Testament example of it. And this kind of leads into this sort of narrative of Israel and how God is using justice through Israel as his representatives to impact the world, as having them as a light to the nations through this land that he's put them in. This is Psalm 72, 1-4. God, Give your justice to the king and your righteousness to the king's son. He will judge your people with righteousness and your afflicted ones with justice. May the mountains bring well-being to the people and the hills righteousness. May he vindicate the afflicted among the people, help the poor, and crush the oppressor. Okay, again, we're not social justice people. The real problem is a lot of people don't know their Bibles. This is a song. This is a song of Israel, and this is a song of Israel that reveals their understanding of Yahweh's character. What is he about? He's about righteousness and justice. And how do we see that? They are singing and beckoning Yahweh to make sure that the king that is placed over Israel represents Yahweh the way that he's supposed to. If you go back to Deuteronomy, 17, where Moses is giving giving you guidelines, legislation for how the king is supposed to conduct himself, long before there's a king, by the way. He's giving this legislation of how the king is supposed to conduct himself, right? And he says, hey, he has to write down the law, read it every day, and make sure he's not too rich. Make sure he has the heart, the character of a common person, and he doesn't think he's better than everybody else. And then once you get into the era of the monarchs, you'll see, as this slide points out, Israel, they want a king that reflects God's character. Yahweh's throne is righteousness and justice, and they want a king that rightly represents Yahweh that's going to rule over them. And a king that rightly represents Yahweh has an orientation towards protecting the poor, widows, fatherless, foreigners, and poor people, and has a sense of justice and ready to be delivered to the oppressor. Any person within the kingdom that's going to attempt to use their position of privilege and power to exploit others. That's what you see in the law. And so this is why Israel writes this song, and they're singing this song to their God. Not only that, when we actually, when you think about it, what are the Proverbs? The Proverbs are these sayings that were collected from Solomon and other kings of Israel, these wise sayings to prepare the kings. Like if you look at Proverbs 31, which I'm gonna read next, Proverbs 31, that's the last proverb. It's the queen mother talking to her son, the prince, in preparation of him going to rule in the future, and she's giving him some counsel. Watch one of the pieces of counsel that she gives him, right? So we're going to see that in a minute. Often people think of Proverbs 31 and they think about, hey, make sure you pick a good wife, a Proverbs 31 woman. And that's certainly a thing that mom warns him about. But she also warns him about something else. But here's how the Proverbs open up. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. So these curators of the Proverbs, and to prepare the kings, want to make sure that the king has the character of God, the way of the Lord, right and just. They want to make sure that this king represents God and cares about the poor, and make sure that the oppressor is not running amok. Psalms 72. And so this is preparation. This is what all of Psalm is. We look at Psalms, and because we come from a very hyper individualistic culture today, we look at Psalms and we think of not Psalms, but Proverbs. We look at Proverbs and we think of Proverbs as like practical wisdom for ourselves, and it can be utilized that way. And that's certainly consistent with its intent. Its intent is for all of God's people to reflect God's wisdom. But it's the design of the Proverbs was intended to educate the kings of Israel, so that they can rightly reflect God in their ruling, and they can adjudicate, because one of the king's role, the king in the ancient Near East, is the Supreme Court. He's the guy that the hardest of hardest cases is going to come before, and he's the guy that's going to rule in it. We see that in the story of Solomon, where these two prostitutes come before him. One's child died, and the other's claiming that the other one's baby is hers, and Solomon has to rule in this very difficult case. Whose baby is it, right? So we don't often understand the significance of righteous and justice, because we're not even aware that this sense of justice is central to God's character, it escapes us. And whatever stands out to us, in the case of the Israelites, they think that the law is God's justice. And they think that the law is how we justify ourselves before God, whereas as God is attempting to save all of humanity through his character of righteousness and justice. And that's ultimately what heaven's going to be. Matthew, let me know if you got anything else to put in there before I jump to the next verse. Or if not, when I jump to the next verse, you take over and I'm going to keep.
I got something I want to say real quick, too.
Go ahead.
They, IUIC and a lot of these One West derivatives conflate justice with revenge. When they say justice, what they mean is to get back. Whatever you did to me, I'm going to do to you. That's what they think biblical justice is. Just want to put that out there. So continue.
And to that point, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but they think like Western European. when they look at that notion of justice in its retributive sense. If that's all justice is to you, you don't know God. You don't know this Bible. The point that I wanted to make, Chris, real quick, to dispel the notion that, okay, well, y'all talking about the Old Testament and you're talking about the law. You even pointed out a few things in the New Testament. Well, the law was just given to the Israelites. It wasn't given to everybody else. Well, here's the issue. If you go to Ezekiel 16, you see that God is dealing with other folk. Ezekiel 16:49 is when God judges pagan nations for not doing right by the most vulnerable. And I know it seems like that we're harping on some issues with the most vulnerable, but we're doing that for a reason. People nowadays don't have a problem with thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, right to life. We just got us a victory over abortion, and the right to life is a right. It's a right not to have your life taken, so it will be a negative right. Don't take my life. But the Bible also has a little bit more to say about justice. That's fairly obvious, because it's also built culturally into the system which we inhabit over here in America. But lest we be accused of only pointing out passages that deal with Israel, Ezekiel 16:49 says, now this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, plenty of food, comfortable security, but didn't support the poor and the needy. They were haughty and they did detestable acts before me, so I removed them when I saw this. And so you get a whole lot packed into that package. A lot of times we also just want to focus on toeva, which is horrible acts. I'm getting a little tongue-tied. Abominable acts with the homosexual lifestyles and things like that. But there's a lot more that God is dealing with these pagan nations who he has not made a covenant with, who he has not made a Mosaic covenant with, and he's righteously judging them. If you go read through the minor prophets, right, you'll see God judging nations for selling other people into slavery, things like that, pagan nations. So God's justice and his expectations are not limited to Israel. Israel was supposed to be a kingdom of priests to teach folks, which they did not do, which you Hebrew Israelites are not doing because you don't understand the Bible. It's okay, because we're here to teach you. You can sit at our feet and learn some things. But I digress. Go ahead, Chris.
And so yeah, I mentioned earlier how the Queen Mother is talking to her son in the Proverbs 31, and look what else she says in Proverbs 31: "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. defend the rights of the poor and needy. Again, this orientation towards the most vulnerable people in society was something that Israel understood was at the heart of the very nature of God, at the heart of the very what God represented. He represented true justice, not just for Israel, as Matthew just pointed out, but Israel was his nation of priests, Exodus 19, so that through him and through this precious land that he was giving them, this land flowing with milk and honey, he could reveal his gracious goodness and flourishing ways to all the rest of the people. And countless times there are these allusions to others coming into Israel because of the way that what Yah had done through Israel. You see that in Deuteronomy chapter 5. All the other nations are going to see the righteous laws that Yahweh gave them. They're going to see how their God is near them when they pray, and they're going to want to come near. You see that in the story of Chronicles when King Solomon is when he's christening the temple. One of the things that he mentions in his prayer is, hey, foreigners from other nations are going to come in to this temple. And guess what? Matter of fact, let me read that, because this is profound. And this goes against the very way that Israelites, these Hebrew Israelites, seem to think of it. Okay, so this is Second Chronicles 6, 32 and 33. It says, as for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your great name and your mighty hand.
Repeat that. Start over.
And again, before I start over, okay, this is Solomon. This is pre-divided kingdom. There's no nations
Northern
beyond.
There's no Northern Kingdom.
There's no Northern Kingdom. This is one kingdom. This is Solomon at the christening of the temple after he built it. Right? It says, as for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel,
who does not belong to what?
Your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm. When they come and get this, pray toward this temple, then hear from heaven, your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel, and may know that this house I have built bears your name. Bears your name. So this is pre-divided. These other peoples are not northerners. These are all the other nations. The Israel is supposed to be a light to the nations, and they're supposed to draw other nations into this land flowing with milk and honey. It's like in the summertime when you got a light on outside, you see a bunch of bugs come near it. Why? They're drawn to the light. Humans, we are drawn to flourishing. Why, if you see an opportunity for you to flourish over there, your goal is to get over there so that you can flourish. This has always been the case. This is how commerce works. People see people are buying over there. I'm going to take my stuff and go over there and try to sell it to them so that I can flourish like the people are doing over there. So this is this concept. And part of flourishing was justice, was a place where justice and righteousness reigned, where there wasn't a broken criminal justice system where wrong people were thrown in jail and nobody cared about it, where there were no people bearing false witness. This is forbidden in the law. There are no people bearing false witness. There are no people exploiting you, working you 20 days in a row, because there's a Sabbath that prevents you from working 20 days in a row, because the way of the Lord is right and just. It's not a bunch of rigid rules that don't make sense or that are only relevant because Yahweh prescribed them. They're principles that you have to live by, and if you live by them, you will flourish. You will experience the very life that Yahweh, that God has for you.
But justice is wearing beards and fringes, though, right? I thought that was
no. That's what they think, and this is the idiosyncrasy of their way of expressing the law, because they think that the law is about hating the Edomite, which ironically makes no sense, because in Deuteronomy 24, Yahweh literally says you must love the Edomite because he is your he is your family member. Let me read that one too. This is Deuteronomy 23, verses 7 and 8. It says, do not despise an Edomite, for the Edomite are related to you. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you resided as foreigners in their country. The third generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. Wait a minute. Did he just say the Edomites and Egyptians can enter the assembly of the Lord in the third generation? Like, how is it? How are you keeping the law when this is in the law and you constantly break this law? You know, and then secondly, how do you hate people that Yahweh actually loves and will even welcome into the assembly? How is that? That makes no sense to me.
Speak.
Because Yahweh cares about justice.
That's right.
That's right.
And justice isn't hating somebody because of something that their ancestors did. As a matter of fact, you know what else it says in the law? It says that the son will not be held accountable for the sins of the father, and the father will not be held accountable for the sins of the son. So how is it that you today are going around accusing people of being, as a matter of fact, you think Edomites and Egyptians are the same people? They're two different people. I can't even start. Anyway, it's amazing that your sense of justice is so skewed, but it makes sense in the way that you guys represent yourself. But we running out of time, so I got to talk a little bit. Matter of fact, and I didn't get a chance to finish typing out this quote, so I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote. Okay, this is a quote from this book right here. It's called "Resurrecting Justice," and it's by the scholar Harkin. Can you see that? Harkin, Douglas Harkin, Herrick. Okay, so this is a quote. When Paul's letters were translated into Latin early on, the words we read in English as righteous and righteousness appeared as justice and justia, where we now read in Romans 1:17 of the righteousness of God. The Latin reads justia di, the justice of God. This also shows up in translations into languages rooted in Latin, for example. La justia di Dieu, French. La justicia de Dios, Spanish. I know I'm butchering some of these. La justicia de Dio, Italian, and so on. Each of these is a translation of the Greek phrase diakosune, theo. The word diakosune is one word in a set of Greek words beginning with the dik root. All of them include the sense of what is just within a social and political order, as well as personal uprightness. So diakos means just. Diakou means to justify or to make just. Diakosune means justice. In ancient Greek, there was no separate set of words that meant righteous or righteousness in the individual moral religious sense. In contrast to just and justice, the dik word in ordinary Greek usage included both personal and legal social political meanings. Why is that relevant? And I know it's hard. I was trying to get the slide up there for y'all so that I can show you guys the actual words. But I gave you the book if you want to go and look that up. And the reason that this is important is because Matthew pointed out that in the Old Testament, there's a hidayah with justice and righteousness, how the two words came together, formed a single concept, and the single concept was at the root of how Israel recognized God. Well, by the time of the New Testament, when Greek became the common language of the world, with these two words, this hidayah, justice and righteousness, morphed into one word with the dik root, and which is often translated in the New Testament diakosune, justify, right? Diakosune. So a lot of our theology of the New Testament, like when we're talking about being justified, particularly in the book of Romans, and this book is kind of a social commentary on the book of Romans, by the way. And basically what this scholar does is he points out how early on in translations they were translated justice, and later on they started translating righteousness. He said, how would Romans read if we read the word justice in some of the places where it says righteousness, where the context would lend to it because of the way that we interpret these passages? So that's what he does. And here's and so it's profound if you really think about it, because we're often in the New Testament, we're consumed with the righteousness of God as this foreign agency, where it seems like, just like in the Old Covenant, where Israel was the justice of God, they were the people of God on earth who lived by God's way to do what is just and right, the way of the Lord, to reflect justice and righteousness to the nations as a light. Is Paul saying in the book of Romans that now Gentiles are being added in so that we can participate with the Jews that are actually obedient and doing it the right way and represent God. So it's not simply about us attaining salvation. It's not simply a thesis. Romans is not simply a thesis about how to attain salvation. Romans is simultaneously a thesis about how to represent Yahweh in the New Testament. And that's why this sense of justice in the New Testament there's the tension of traditionally how Scripture has been translated, and now as scholars are digging deeper and learning more about the world of the New Testament, and translations are being updated. You see all the translations eventually get updated as they learn more, and as scholars come to consensus on these things. There's this movement that's saying, okay, we have to rightly place justice, because as we saw in the Old Testament, particularly in the Psalms and in the law, justice is like front and center. And in the New Testament, traditionally we haven't talked a whole lot about justice.
Yeah, yeah. The question is often asked: did Paul and Jesus preach the same thing as the Old Testament prophets? And also, if the question is yes for Jesus, the question is often: did Paul preach the same thing as Jesus? And the question is yes. If you are attuned to the Old Testament thought within the New Testament scriptures, you will see, for instance, in Romans 1, verse 18, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against two things," right? And you got, when you're reading this, remember what Jesus said: love God, love your neighbor, right? Mm-hmm. Two things. It says all godlessness or ungodliness and unrighteousness. Remember what Chris talked about with the word righteousness, right? Remember that it's revealed. God's justice or his wrath is revealed against two things: ungodliness, that's your vertical relationship, and unrighteousness, which is your horizontal relationship.
Or maybe injustice.
Or maybe injustice. But what about Romans 6, right? In Romans 6, Paul is talking about how we've been crucified with Jesus Christ, and we have risen to new life. And guess what? We no longer have to yield our members. Verse 18, it says, verse 13, and do not offer any of your parts of it. He's talking about our members, right? Of it to sin as weapons for unrighteousness, or what? Injustice. But as those who are alive from the dead, offer yourselves to God, and all parts of yourselves to God as weapons for righteousness or justice.
And there's not, just to be clear, because I know a lot of people like, hey, justice is almost, how justice can be a dirty word today is beyond me. But justice, Christians talking about justice is almost like cussing. That's how a lot of people perceive it today. When, again, like, how can something that is known, Yahweh's throne is known by, be something that's bad? So, okay, and here's another verse to consider in light of this revelation that in the New Testament, some of the words that are translated righteousness should have been translated justice, because theology often, is a part of, there's the hermeneutical spiral. If you're not, familiar with that, there's like the world that these words were written in. The words can't mean something that they did not mean in the words in which they were written in. And then the words have relative definitions themselves, and there's this tension between the denotative definition and the connotative definition. So often what people want to do is they want to translate everything with the denotative definition. And in real life, words just are much more complex and more nuanced than the denotative definition, the very reason that connotation exists. So context is going to determine. So you're trying to determine, hey, should I use the denotative definition, or is the context implying nuance where I should translate it with one of its other connotations? So 2 Corinthians chapter 5, what's the last verse? It's the Chris Thomas song, "He became sin that knew no sin, that we might become the righteousness of God." Think about that. It says, let me go read it. It says, though God is making his appeal through us, right? 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to start at verse 20. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that we might become the justice of God. Think about it. Think about that. That we might become the justice of God. Because that's exactly what Israel was. They were the justice of God. They were a society on earth that lived by the way of the Lord, what was just and right, and by living out. But when they actually were doing it, they flourished, and others flourished, and others came in to see God, and others prayed at the temple, as Solomon said, and that was a good thing. That wasn't a bad thing. That was a good thing, because that was what Israel was supposed to be all about, drawing in these nations. Right. So yeah, justice. We only played 20 seconds of the video regarding justice, because the rest of the video he's talking about Deuteronomy 28, a whole bunch of racism and a bunch of other stuff in the video. But his premise of justice, the Bible being about justice, is actually true, just not in the way that he thinks about it. It's actually what he thought. Hey, all this hands up and marching and stuff like that, that's not potentially a reflection of God's type of justice, when in reality it is. Speak up for the poor and oppressed, mom said to her son, the future king, in Proverbs 31, verse 8 and 9. Justice, in the sense of we think of justice, as long as we get it right, as long as it is consistent with Yahweh's ethics of human dignity, loving your neighbor as yourself, not oppressing, not stealing, not doing things, not mistreating other people, rather the poor or the rich, not mistreating either one of them, but everybody, as Matthew pointed out, getting their due, whatever that is. Whatever the due is that God prescribed, as long as everybody is getting their due, both in a positive and a negative way, and it is consistent with the Bible, then it's true justice. It's justice the way that God wants things to be. And we Christians are supposed to be that. We're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. We're supposed to be communities of people that outsiders see that God is among us by the way that we live and love one another. That's
it right there. It's having a firm biblical understanding of justice within the community. Why? So that, one, that you are in obedience to God, but so that others can see your obedience to God, so they could be drawn and they will lock arms with the community to also reflect God justice, right? It isn't just you in the corner pointing fingers saying you this, you that. No, it's about everyone getting an opportunity to be a part of God's justice. Everyone, not just the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. So with that, we're going to leave it at this. And this was great. We are on record, and this is something that we don't see IUIC talking about. See, this is teaching. This is what teaching looks like. You know what I mean? So we would love to see them doing this, but that's not what they're concerned about. They're concerned about this revenge motif. That's what they want. They're not talking about actual justice and fairness and kindness and thinking of others other than yourself as a collective. They are not teaching that at all. All right. So with that,
I got a quick comment to the bench. Like I think what they see in Scripture is when they see Yahweh, or when they see the people of God crying out in righteous indignation, they see that and they think that that's revenge, or they think that they're doing that when in reality they're not. Because, like, to me, Deuteronomy 23, it doesn't get any clearer than that. It's in the law, which you claim to keep the law. It's in there, right? So how is it that you can have a fundamental belief that undermines the very thing that you see as your sociological identity? You see the law as central to how you can represent Yah, and yet there's a law right in front of you. And SOC, go watch his video. You see the same thing. You want to see the Sabbath? Y'all coming out of y'all houses, go watch CMB's video from earlier. What you're going to see is these guys don't keep the law. These guys are law breakers. We are the real law keepers because we understand the law. Because as Paul put it in Romans 13:9, do not commit adultery, do not steal, or any other commandment are all fulfilled in this, that you love your neighbor as yourself. All the commandments are summed up in that.
And with that, it's Apologists in Detroit, MJ Jackson and BK signing off. Peace.